Hi everyone, thank you for joining me once again. Today we're going to talk about mystical and magical knowledge created by women and why it is so challenging to find it. In every culture we have mystical and magical knowledge. Sometimes it is an extension of the mainstream rituals, and sometimes it is something completely different that has this sort of conversation going back and forth with the mainstream rituals. Sometimes it becomes a part of this world, this cultural world of religion and magical beliefs, and sometimes it remains something very different and never truly acceptable. And in between those two edges, you have a lot of shades and different colors of how these two are actually speaking with each other and combine. But the knowledge which is created and preserved by women is very hard to find. Why? First off, women were always very scared and afraid to share their knowledge because they were afraid that every knowledge that they have that passes from mother to daughter and might be shared with people from outside those feminine circles might be seen as a knowledge of witchcraft and they will become witches. And women were always under the danger, the threat of being declared as witches and then they will be persecuted. So they made sure that the knowledge will not slip out. We know that towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, we have people, early researchers, that are traveling in different communities and literally knocking on doors, trying to talk to the elderly women of the community to gain some of their knowledge. They are almost banishing them from their doorsteps, and they actually give them a few reasons of why they're doing so. First off, they don't say it literally, but they're obviously being afraid to be seen as witches. Mainstream religion in monotheism never opened the door for women to be part of the rituals, of the sacred rituals of the religion. So actually every knowledge that they had automatically becomes something mystical and magical. We do have to say it didn't begin with monotheism though. Even in ancient Babylon, we know that the man who did something miraculous was a magician. A woman who did the same was a witch. They also say that they are concerned that if they will share this knowledge with someone who isn't worthy, it will reflect back on them and will also turn them into women or people that are not worthy of the knowledge. And then this knowledge will actually lose from its power. The spells, the rituals, the magical acts, they will damage, they will harm the magical abilities of their knowledge if they share it with someone who isn't worthy. And many times this knowledge was meant to help others, so they didn't want to not being able to do so. If someone had a disease and they decided it is time to call the woman who can heal him, they would assume that maybe he is possessed or there is some kind of a demonic force that is in the area. What she would do is that she would lock herself in the house with that person. Now, obviously, if that person was a man and not a woman, it was already something that was unacceptable. And they sent everyone away from the house in order to protect them. And they also tell the neighbors to go as far as they can. And what she would do, she would start a battle with this demonic force and sometimes a negotiation. Now, we hear of men in the past, such as rabbis and priests, that actually had some kind of a negotiation with demons, and sometimes they even came to assist them. But when a woman did that, because women were considered to be very open to foreign influences and demonic forces, they would automatically become witches. And perhaps the women that had the knowledge saw the mystical and the magical world as something which is less black and white. There were many shades of gray in the middle of how you can work with forces. We know that women that created incantation balls stood on the rooftop of the house and sometimes summoned some kinds of demons and demonesses in order for their assistance in protecting the people in the house from other forces that want to hurt them. So their knowledge sometimes was not mainstream knowledge of how to deal with a certain problem, even if it was in the areas of mystical and magical knowledge. Also, in their practices, we know that they use things that didn't last. It's not like they used an amulet from copper or silver or gold. They use things that we all have in our kitchen: olive oil, salt, sometimes flour, dough, things that they used and they used them and just threw them out. So we don't have anything materialistic that we can actually observe. Also, in many of the communities, the women didn't know how to read and write. Some of the men did, some of them didn't, but women didn't have the knowledge. So even if they wanted to write something, they didn't have the ability. And women that did write things, many of the time, they wrote things that were already known and acceptable within the mainstream rituals. There were some spaces and areas that were known to be women only. For example, when a woman was giving birth, it was a place only for women. Neither the women or the men thought that they belonged in the room there. So the one that is in charge of assisting the woman giving birth is usually the midwife, someone who has the knowledge, and they combine medical knowledge and things that today we see as magical acts, such as circling the woman with maybe a salt, or sometimes just painting it with a chalk or even a piece of coal. Sometimes they would do it on the wall. There was a woman there sitting with a sword. Now, these were actually rituals that people knew about. Were they considered to be mystical or magical? Depends on who you ask and depends when. Now, it's interesting to see that some of those women that weren't willing to share their knowledge actually thought that some of the knowledge should be in women's hands only. They didn't think that this kind of knowledge is appropriate for men. So you actually have knowledge that belongs to men and knowledge that belongs to women. It's a very interesting concept. There were certain acts, such as preparing jewelry or clothes for a bride, that the women that created them, they actually combine a lot of magical symbols into them. For example, stars that were supposed to bring good luck for the bride. And it was a very women's area where they could talk and share their knowledge. And this was an acceptable place for women to be with each other, talk and share knowledge, and preparing things for the next bride. So, if you have some wise advice that you heard from your grandmother, your mother, or any other inspiring women, do share it with us. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.